We created quite a comprehensive model, evaluating a variety of different um, parameters pertaining to assets becoming non-functional. And this model was kindly distributed, but prior to the meeting as well. Now, um, Rich and I actually had a meeting a couple of weeks back to try and operationalize this model. And we've come up with the idea of filling in the details as much as possible just to evaluate whether the model is fit for purpose and do that on a variety of different asset types. I've done so with our parent company, MCFT, for and I keep coming back to this example for measuring the impact of an ice cream machine going down. Um, and then Richard, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the fire assessments. I think George
We
uh,
did some work, didn't we, on the Excel you produced?
yes. This one I've now set up with the ice cream machine. Let me just go through this first, and then
Okay.
we can because I've when I was filling this in, I became aware that I ended up with some questions that I wanted to open up to the group as well,
Cool.
because I think some areas might be slightly duplicated, and in other ways we might be slightly exposed as well.
Sure.
So going through the exercise was very, very useful. Um, if we start at this at the top, right? So commercial context, the idea of describing in what context the business operates in which this asset is installed and what system it is part of, because that forms an important part of what your maintenance regime looks like and what the impact of that asset downtime looks like. So for an ice cream machine, right? So we're looking at McDonald's in the Philippines here. We're trying to maximize product sales. We're limiting operator costs, so that it needs to be as accessible as possible. Limited training, get up and go. Limiting downtime because you want to maximize product sales. Market position is clearly low cost products, fast food. This isn't uh, five-star dining. And in terms of a commercial model on the maintenance, it's cost plus. So there is an initial purchasing cost, with a warranty period, but after that, it's purely cost that you have against the asset. In terms of controls, we're looking at the parent system. So in this case, it's just part of the kitchen's electrical system. It isn't part of an HVAC system or anything more comprehensive. But when we're looking at fire maintenance, for example, you can imagine that the all-encompassing system could be very important. The same thing is true with, for example, kitchen equipment that is gas equipped as well, because you need to make sure that pressures are maintained, water systems are maintained, etc. In terms of maintenance, there's an SFG20 reference for that, which we adhere to. And then in terms of parts failure, there are exploded parts diagrams. We actually ran uh, some data analysis over the last 5 years, what type of parts are most consumed against these assets. And what we're finding is some form of compressor changes against the heat pump. And we're finding something called a tune-up kit, where you're actually replacing a number of different components. That's a scraper blade, motor components, and the manufacturer also recommends this to be replaced every 5 years to extend the life cycle of the asset. But it depends on the usage cycle against that particular asset. Service agents is MCFT at the moment. Digital maturity is interesting. This also raised a question with me whether we need to create some form of scale to rank digital maturity. Um, but in this case, it's fairly limited. There are IoT upgrades available for these type of machines where you can monitor performance, energy consumption, downtime directly from the asset itself. But that's not something that comes out of the box. There are aftermarket add-ons. Um, yeah, then on the risks. I th correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have the duplicate here. When we compare risks and we have the risk matrix, we also have a risk matrix really under compliance with risk of consequences, severity and likelihood. I think there's significant overlap there.
Is it maybe not that the risk of hazard is the risk of hazard of the device and the operator effectively, and then the impact compliance risk is effectively what risk is it to the commercial organisation for the downtime of the device, rather than, you know, you've got you've got the human operator risk, and then you've got the commercial risk to, you know, if you've not got ice cream, does somebody actually turn tail and disappear and doesn't end up buying the burger or whatever it is McDonald's, isn't it? So they're maybe not going in for ice cream, it's just but it's the whole package. I don't know. That's my
But,
thinking.
but that's where you'd normally build in contingency, isn't it?
Yeah, effectively, yeah, whether you've got
Yeah.
another machine or whatever or effectively you're first going back, Terence, to your discussion about first line spares. Do you actually hold a spare there? What is it, a technician that needs to
Because
fit it?
typically on that risk, they'd say whether it's it's a key building asset, isn't it? So you'd identify the assets, you'd profile them as to whether they were operational, that they were mandatory
Critical,
for operational
effectively,
delivery. Yeah. So it's a critical asset, isn't it?
Mm.
And so that's typically you, off the back of it, you'd actually classify what type of asset, because otherwise certain elements of risk profiling wouldn't be required if it's just a, you know, a nice to have or an add-on. But if it's a critical business delivery element, if your job is purely producing ice cream, it's a critical business element. If you're just doing that as part of of an extended retail outlet, it may just be a different business stream. Yeah. So I think I'd put a classification in as to what type of asset it is, and then you can actually sort of put it as a BAU when it's a business critical.
That makes sense. Are there, as far as you're aware, are there the standards
Yeah,
for
typically, yeah.
managing that?
If you look at SF 20, isn't it? SF 20?
SFG 20.
SFG
Yes,
20.
yeah. That typically will dictate all of your critical business assets based on your ability to use the space or the building. And that's typically what most most asset management refers to as their sort of categorization. It then gives you the life cycle and the replacement and everything else arrangements for it. Other than that, it depends on what the actual business is, isn't it? As to what the content of the building is and what the output.
I think, Howard, SFG 20 is more about maintenance procedures.
Yeah, but the point being, George, that it will identify what needs to be maintained and therefore what is critical. Because you could argue the fact that if you've got something in place and you've got a statutory provision against it, then that makes it critical by the nature of the potential penalty.
Yes.
But equally, you know, if you start at the SFG 20, then it does give you a starting point to at least agree whether it's applicable or not. Yep. Otherwise, you've got to accept that the business is mature enough to be able to have done a business critical asset list.
Yeah, really, really fair point. Certainly something from BISA's side that we could repurpose. So yeah, asset criticality. That is a pretty good addition. Yeah, so then we have the risk of hazards, which is our RAMs, I suppose. And you put in your method statements and mitigation strategies and parts replacement strategies in place to mitigate those hazards. Still not sure about the compliance consequences. So, Gordon, you were saying it's the risk of downtime, or risk of business impact.
Yeah, I mean, that was just my thought process when we came on to that second limb, of that second sphere of risk, is that the impact that they're thinking about from a business impact rather than from a health and safety impact from the appliance as such? I was just offering that up for comment more than anything else, Terence.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've tried to incorporate that as well in the cost incurred.
Yeah.
Which made me think that actually there's a bit of a gray area here around these two parameters because we have lost revenues or opportunity cost, and then cost incurred as well. So, and then maintenance cost sort of as well. So they're a little bit they're overlapping a little bit. I think we could define them a little bit more clearly.
If you're putting maintenance costs in their terms, then what about statutory or mandatory inspection? Shouldn't that be above this? Because that would be part of it. On the basis if something is subject to statutory or mandatory inspection or maintenance, then actually that needs to be factored in.
Yeah, absolutely. The legal requirement.
Yeah.
Is that drives your maintenance need, except if it impacts asset performance. But even
Well,
then,
no, but it's not. But there's no point having something that works perfectly but hasn't been inspected because you shouldn't actually be using it. So actually, you could be at risk on the basis of actually using something that hasn't been maintained or inspected. So, the classic one is lifts. You install a lift at Cat A stage, but you don't get around to using it until the Cat B fit out has been done. But that can be 2-3 years hence, in which case you've then got an uninspected lift that you have to start fresh with.
Yeah. I suppose the prosecutions, in some way, SFG could help with this as well, especially if there is a definition. I think they track.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that just
legal
gives
framework.
gives you the whole life cycle.
Yeah.
Have we had buy-in from SFG 20?
Buy-in in what way?
Is there anybody being approached from SFG 20? Or do we have any experts within SFG 20? I mean, I was speaking to them last week about direction of travel with certain pieces of guidance with regards to IoT and APIing data from cloud systems that feeds into their CAFM and CMMS systems. And they're only probably just starting on that journey. So, George, what you said earlier on, they're kind of, it is a maintenance guidance portal, if you like. They are trying to get it up to speed with taking data from devices to feed into that process to make it a more reactionary maintenance scheduling process rather than just PPM. Planned preventative maintenance sometimes has you doing maintenance for just doing maintenance rather than actually does the asset really need it. Howard, you're chuckling away there.
Well, yeah, because it's SFG is a guidance, isn't it? It's not a finished standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, so they can sit there quite happily on the basis that there's no legal mandate to actually follow SFG 20. It's just, would it be used as what will be classed as a best practice industry standard?
Yeah.
And the argument, I think, nowadays in court would be yes, it is.
Yeah, it's the only thing that's there, isn't it?
Well, exactly. There's nothing else unless you go down. Yeah. So I think
it was actually originally compiled. I was involved right at the very beginning, back in the late 80s, with it, and it was originally created by some of the big FM companies under the HVCA, the Heating and Ventilation Contractors Association, to create a level playing field for tendering, so that everybody was tendering based on a similar set of procedures that would be, a level. So that's how it originally started. in many cases, that's really what it is now.
I know that it's become slightly dispatched from Visa because it's become such a big, forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn,
Yeah.
but it's become such a big profit centre that it's become a bit dominant in what it actually does. And it's not really listening to Visa and the technical committees to try and feed into them. So I think there's some resistance, there's some friction between the two. And it would be interesting to see. I mean, I don't know. Did you speak to David Fries, by the way, George? Did you get a conversation with him?
I haven't yet, but I do need to.
That wasn't a call for action. I was just asking a question.
No, I've not. No. I as I've said to you, I think there are some challenges that are happening at the moment, which you've just touched on there. That they are. I think there's new people come in from the management point of view within the SFG 20 arena, which are they're driving income and revenues without, and I think there is a bit of a disconnect in terms of the service. We're finding that a number of big maintenance organisations who are their customers are not so happy at the moment, and that's not to say that we should be doing that. We should be not using SFG 20, but the way they're driving its use is being driven by their commercial drivers rather than from a proper operational perspective.
Service delivery aspect. I would agree with that. It's the same kind of comments I've been getting from some of the customers that we're speaking to. But it's only, as we said earlier on, it's the only game in town, so it's the only place we can refer back to. We just have to, hence the reason for the question, are we engaging with SFG 20 individually? It's Paul somebody, I think, the technical officer, I think it is. That's the name that I've been given. I can't forget his surname, but I'll stick it in the notes at some stage.
Okay. Thank you.
At all.
I think interesting developments. Yes, so insurance, legal requirements, and then this all kind of made sense to me. Operational disruption, I think, makes sense to try to map that into the financial model as well. Howard, you already mentioned, what are the alternative assets? Are they available? That makes a significant impact. And then environment, try to do carbon calculations based on power consumption of the unit, which I think makes it nicely quantifiable, especially with potential ESG agendas. I wasn't aware if there was a standard that we could refer to in relation to this. Obviously, SIPC has got standards for life cycles, which I've referenced. Life cycles, asset condition, but I'm not sure if something exists at the moment in relation to carbon footprints and sort of carbon consumption and waste disposal.
The only thing you can do there is probably refer to Tom's, isn't it? On the basis that for a lot of sustainability now, people are just referring to Tom's, which is a nightmare.
Thomas, can you enlighten me?
Yeah, Tom's are the sustainability criteria that go into the different evaluation points and assessments for carbon. So they'll talk about including carbon. So they have elements where they're talking about logistics, materials, manufacturing, all the elements of delivery within a project. And then they're saying there's certain offsets you can have with regard to carbon reduction, both in the manufacturing, sourcing, delivery, and the actual installation. So that's the only one I've come across, but they're a bloody nightmare to operate.
Yeah.
And you almost often need to have a complete, you need to first of all decide as an organisation what level of sustainability you're going to sign up to, whether it's contractual or whether it's optional, because you will need to then have a complete sustainability manager then working through everything Most of the larger contracts and frameworks now are just asking for a commitment, normally up to a maximum of 5% of fee as a carbon offset, and then the delivery chain is then putting that as a final submission at the end of, or either as a period return, annual return, or at the end of the project, so that the client can then confirm what their carbon offset has been throughout the project. But that's the only one I've come across really, outside of BREEAM and or anything that's specific about, how something's being built in regard to a standard.
There's some stuff in embodied carbon from SIBS as well. There's some recent documentation that's came out from there.
But it's
a bit early days for it, to be honest.
Yeah, from a
there's a lot
practical
of data
point of
sheets
view.
from manufacturers that are not really
Yeah.
getting up to speed with that.
And equally, when you look, there's about 20 TOMs, so there's 20 different categories, and there's only 3 that are monetarized, which is basically talking about use of use of recruits or graduates or training, and then obviously you've got a carbon offset for travel. The rest of it is a percentage calculation, which you're going to be a maths genius or you're going to be a sustainability manager of new breed, because for old school, just ignore it. And you just go on, let's just employ graduates, make sure they're trained, see if they're going to university or going to do a college course, and then you can claim the offset to it. Wow. But it's fairly new, but it's I'm not normally that fussed about it. The only way that you introduce carbon is when you're looking at utilities heating systems, and you're trying to use that as a business case justification because you can drive the efficiency.
And those are direct cost angle.
Yeah, so I'm a cynic, so don't necessarily go on my view, but I'd welcome, Gordon, I don't know what you think, and others, what you come across.
Yeah, we're not getting, I mean, as distributors of product, we're getting very occasionally asked for data, and we endeavour to try and get that data from the manufacturers as best we possibly can. But as I said earlier on, it's very, very early days conception. Yeah. I can't remember what the reference is for it, to be honest, Terence, but I'll maybe stick that in the notes when I come across it. It's TM something. I'll find it.
That'd be super useful. Yeah, thanks. And then TOMS, that's just TOMS.
Yeah, I mean, there's I work with government contracts, and they're always very keen to be able to demonstrate compliance with every new legislation and requirement. So I can send you a copy that I haven't of a TOMS document that we received, but it would be under confidential cover. So I'll send it to George, and then he can issue it. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah.
George, are you happy with that?
Yeah, sure.
But it would be, it's not from me, yeah?
Understood. Thank you.
Pleasure. And now I've realised this is recorded, so I've just lost my job. I'm at the end of my career, so what's it matter? No, the TOMS document itself, it's not bespoke to any product. It's just, we had a discussion with them because they're trying to apply 5% to every delivery partner on multi-million-pound delivery. And the issue there is, how do you actually demonstrate that level of achievement? And the only thing they come up with is by using the TOMS reference point, but it's impractical, would be one alleged comment someone could make.
Well retrieved.
As advised by George.
That little section is going to get deleted. You know that, Howard.
Yeah, no, I think if it stays within the current parlance of expectation, then it's something we may need to reference. But at the moment, it's got no mandate. It's an optional element that projects may wish to use or not, based on whatever sustainability strategy they want to operate. And then it depends on what's put into a contractual term. So if you look at mandate or statutory, there is none at the moment, unless it's put into contract. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think to me, it's an FYI. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
moving on, reputational, yeah, pretty self-explanatory in terms of how that's defined. I just wanted to open up to the group, you know, having sorted this duplication and having added an additional section on asset criticality rating, and statutory inspection requirements. Are there any obvious gotchas or missing parameters that you're seeing? Would this be suitable to your projects as well?
I think you'll only find that out when you start to map it against other pieces of equipment and other processes.
Hmm.
You know, the other things will drop into it, but I think I would imagine that's 90% of what's going to be replicated across all different appliances or application of product.
Could I ask a cynic's question?
Absolutely.
Why would you go if you're saying this is for every asset, then I'm not sure that you would actually do this for every asset. It's a large process. Wouldn't you apply this to business critical assets on the basis of making sure that you've qualified the risk? Because literally a building could have hundreds of thousands of assets.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, as a
Hmm.
strategy and approach, yeah, no problem at all. It's just what the application would be.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think you would only try to do this for business critical assets. Yeah, if you do this for everything, it's pointless. It's a red tape exercise, isn't it? You're
Yeah.
never going to see the return.
So this could be the sanity check for business critical,
Mhm.
or to clarify whether something is business critical.
Start the debate effectively. It's all
Yeah.
relative to what
Yeah,
department
but
they're representing, isn't it?
yeah, just got to be careful. We're not putting this as a process map that needs to be followed for every asset.
Mm.
It's almost as if when you're looking at your asset list, you do actually want to sort of categorize or profile the assets to begin with to see if they are business critical or they've got a high trending sort of maintenance replacement cost.
I
Or
agree
they've got a
entirely,
business
Howard.
impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that will be just a matter of that's easily done in terms of data templates and attributes against certain things. So we can do that based on an asset type level, Howard. That's the way we would typically do it.
Yeah, to me, it's a radio button you switch on and off, isn't it? But what we're saying is so that you can actually have a complete assessment, should you wish to, this is the template you should follow.
Yeah.
Where you believe it's necessary or it's business critical, and that could be for whatever purpose.
Yeah, that's good. George, sorry, I know you sent me an email about an hour ago, with some views from your side. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, sure. Bear with me. I think Howard will be familiar with this. What we're doing is, bear with me a second. We've been talking with the HSE for probably 18 months now about standardizing a lot of the health and safety file, and also looking at things from a point of how risks are assessed. Let me. So if I share my screen. Bear with me a second, sorry. Yeah, so the HSE has been working with MBA with Uniclass to classify risks, to come up with a standardized convention for risks under Uniclass, and Chris Lucas, who I imagine you know, don't you, Howard, at the HSE. He's one of the senior guys.
Yeah.
He shared this with me, which is their master sort of risk table. I've not properly looked at it yet, but it's looking at things from a CDM perspective. And what I'm interested in is to see if, as far as Active Plan is concerned, for example, we can put this in as libraries so that when you're looking at a 360 photo, for example, you can assign against an asset or a system or a space a risk. And you could do that just in the same way that you can do that against a condition of an item or whatever. So it just occurred to me, Terence, that when we're looking at what the risks are, that we might want to follow this this methodology.
George, how big is that document? Because if you're not careful, that's risk by questionnaire, isn't it? Not by assessment.
No. But I agree. I guess the point is it's a library.
Could you just if you just
There's 1900.
Jesus.
What I'm more interested in is if you scroll to the right, please.
Get the top table. Yeah.
No, it's the categorization of risk. So it's column E.
Yeah.
If you just scroll down that, it's what's interesting is what they believe the risk is.
Shall I just, if I put a filter on it?
Yeah,
sort by whatever it is.
If I had a filter.
On E, column E, George, please, thank you.
Yeah. There's not that many.
So what they are is basically a sanity check for the individual risks.
This is very interesting. I mean, what we're doing is through the risk assessment method statements, we have similar type of definitions for specific risks. But if they're linking this to Uniclass, that is a game changer, because all of a sudden, for a particular asset type, you would be able to seed a specific risk profile.
Let me just see Uniclass.
George, are you able to share that?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd like to look at it, because I suppose the question going through my head is, what's the purpose of that? Is it so that it gives non-practitioners a guide as to what to ask or what to review? Or is it there as a prompt to assist? And given the fact that HSE dual role, to me, I think it's the former rather than the latter, because they don't issue guidance anymore.
No, I think, yeah.
It seems to be a personnel protective system as well. It's all about the risk to the operator.
It is CDM.
The list that I've got. It's
It's definitely CDM. I'm just trying to remember where the Uniclass risk table is.
But if we start expanding Uniclass, that's going to become unworkable.
Yeah. Okay. I know that there's a risk table. I can't find it at the moment, simply because I can't recall. I mean, you'd have thought you'd be able to search on risk, wouldn't you? Risk management. There's definitely a risk management table, which Yeah, it's not giving me that information. But I'm happy to share that. I mean, as you understand, Howard, that what we're trying to do, in fact, what we're always trying to do is see if we can standardize as much as possible, so that when people are doing things, we've actually got a standard way of describing them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two thoughts going through my mind. One is the fact that if you try and incorporate that into active plan, then you'll make everyone paranoid because everything will be then flagged as a potential risk. So if you do it as a word reference, this is why I was looking at categorization I've put in, then you're going to have so much linkage for 1900 lines, which could be awkward.
Okay.
If it's put as if you take the active plan approach of creating a library reference, you put them as topics, you say risk, and this is per topic. These are the typical risks and these are the typical questions. I think that's a very useful guide for people within active plan to go and have a look at if they've got a particular topic. And then you just need a single icon that says a help function for risk. But to try and incorporate those as prompts within the creation or the population of active plan will be a nightmare.
What we've done here, this is just our sort of early thoughts. We've got, okay, we've selected an item. We can then look at that from a point of view of that. So we've got an operational status, a grade, a condition, and also we've downloaded. You can assign certain risks to an asset, and they
yeah,
can be different.
you could always put there. You could put HSE risk guidance, and then people, if they wish to, they could go for further guidance.
Yes. Yeah, I think it looks as though they're classified in some sort of way as well, Howard.
Yeah, I just I'm nervous to an extent because if you've got an operational premise, then all the risks should be in the O&Ms anyway, and it's down to the operator and staff, not necessarily so it's
yeah, I think it's a matter of accessing the information, because as we know, stuff should be in the O&Ms and often isn't.
Well, it won't be. Yeah, we know that.
Yeah. So therefore, what a part of our thought with this is to try and replicate what was done years ago with Safety Base, which is the thing that the HSE Gordon Crick sort of pioneered. So this is something that it will be dead easy for us to add into Active Plan, and that's really what I'm thinking from our commercial perspective, but also having a way of having some standardized risks with standardized solutions to those risks, so that you could have some sort of flow through.
If you look at the commerciality, and please everyone tell me to shut up if I'm on a soapbox. Active Plan has to be a commercial application. Do I want to be reminded of something that I haven't considered as a prompt or as something I can choose to reference? If it's put there and I've got a risk status, then as long as I've got an icon that says HSE risk guidance, if I choose to follow it, that's fine. If I don't, it's not mandated. Otherwise, I'm almost going to demonstrate that I haven't considered risk because of what the HSE changing risk profile is.
Okay.
what I mean? I can choose to make a judgment on the risk as an operator. The HSE guidance is an ideal. This should happen, this should happen, this should happen, but we know the operational is the operator, as reasonably practicable to apply their duty of care. Otherwise, it's getting very prescriptive. And what we're doing is almost creating a HSE checklist if not careful. Whereas if it's a reference point I can choose to go to if I hadn't considered.
Don't we want to? I'm just thinking, forget the commerciality of it for the minute, Howard. And I do that all too frequently. Yeah. But would we not want to say that to include in the asset information model an alert to somebody that if, for example, they're going to drill a hole in a compartment wall, that these are the things that they need to be aware of?
It is, but then I would argue that what I'm looking at then is the RAMs and the competence of the person carrying out the task, nothing to do with the asset itself.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I think it's down to the competency of the individuals carrying out the task.
The asset, there's enough of a task just to get people to tag and attach just the integral data to an asset, and then to apply the right inspection, maintenance, replacement regime to it and put a life cycle cost against it. If you then start to extend into what is the correct procedure to carry out that particular process,
I'm with you.
I think if you're not careful, we're blurring what this is trying to be. If it's put as an annex, which is then a guidance to the safe or guidance to risk associated with that particular project or that particular asset, brilliant. It's further information and it adds to the credibility of the asset documentation, but it's nothing to do with the actual asset itself. If there's any risk involved with that asset, it's how it's operated and how it's manufactured and installed, which is all down to the O&Ms and your warranties.
So it's down to the activity that's being carried out rather than the asset. Yes.
So it's a mix. It's a mix, isn't it? It's a mix.
But all of that should be within your warranties and your commissioning and your O&M detail. If you're looking at the PPM, then this is a risk associated with the operation of the PPM. I would suggest, as opposed to it being an integral risk of that asset, because you shouldn't be putting faulty equipment in the first place or dodgy equipment. And if they're looking at CBM, you rely on the warranty of the particular product you've put in or you've selected.
If it sits in isolation as an operating asset, so if for example, the ice cream maker has an electrical point, it has a mains water point, but they're kind of associated with a supply position to the asset, and the asset's functioning on in its independent self. At the same time, heating and cooling systems, you've got individual components in there that make that whole bigger system work. And I think, as said before in some of these discussions, the problem you have with that is some manufacturers become so silo fixated in their component in a bigger system that it's all about them rather than about that full system. And you're now getting devices that are looking at the operation of the system and anything that is shared commonly with the system. And that's where it's quite interesting. And you go back to SFG20, that's where I think SFG20 is still fixated with the individual components. And
I agree with you.
But this is where you should have an FM strategy, you should have an AM strategy. Yeah. Which go over the two. And all the asset management is making sure you identify how your strategy then applies to a known asset list. And if you have an asset, can I at least have the right data or up-to-date data on what that asset is and what my options are for the life cycle?
I mean, no mistake, some of that demand for that asset information comes from clients' experience of failure what you mentioned, Terence, the reason you're looking at the ice cream machine, which seems strange to people, is because of the cost of failure that they had in an operational building. So they don't want it to happen again. So that's where they focus in. But we shouldn't be, the vast majority of building owners don't actually own 500 buildings or franchises across the, with multiple, and they all think they're having one problem because they think it's their problem and their problem alone. And in reality, it's not. The whole flipping industry's having the same problem. It's just they're not getting the information back that it's actually resolvable, or how it can be resolvable, or how it can be fixed a wee bit better. That's my thoughts anyway.
No, I think that's really sensible. And George, to come back on the HSE risk assessment, I think it could be of added value, not as a prescriptive measure, but as a reference guide. Because I think when it comes to RAMs, it's a mixture of the site risks. So what are the risks of that particular system, Gordon, in your example, right? So what are the points of failure and the risks associated with that system? What's going on that site? What is the asset type? So there are particular risks inherent to the type of asset and its operations, and then the individual works carried out against that asset. So depending on whether you're doing PPM or reactive work or whatever the instructions are, there are different risks associated with that. So it's a complicated matrix, isn't it, when you get to that point? But I think it could be of added value for a maintenance contractor.
Another way of viewing it, bit anarchic would be, is that whilst you've got an asset list, you also have a separate tab which is risk. You can replicate your asset list, and then you can create a separate risk profile. And that could be a different functionality or a different deliverable within Active Plan.
Mm.
So in other words, if you look at Active Plan being your golden thread, first of all, I need to know what it is. I need to be able to demonstrate what it is, and then the associated life cycle. You could then have a separate tab, George, which is risk. And actually, all you do is you replicate the data you have, and then you can create a different risk element, a risk profiling element for them as a separate functionality. I wouldn't try and merge risk into what is a data capture, because then you're going into assessment and evaluation.
Yes.
I think coming back at
I'll certainly have it as a reference point. I think it's brilliant. And also, as long as you can throw it back at the HSE that you're trying to be as helpful as possible. One feedback that allegedly we may have received, God, I have to be so careful, aren't I? Supposedly the government council who was responsible for writing the Building Safety Act was quite frustrated last year because they believed that they'd been told by the industry and by ministers and such like that there was no Building Safety Act sort of support or software that could help them. Right? Nice little bit of feedback. Duly fed back to George. But the reality there is that Active Plan perfect positioning for me has always been that it gives you the structure and the fire safety elements of the Building Safety Act for relevant buildings, and for the rescoping as it extends past high risk. In which case, Building Safety Act doesn't look at risk yet. It looks at, can you just tell me what you've got? Part one. Part two is how we're managing it.
Yep.
What's the active risk management for that site? So to me, there's a phase one, there's a phase two. Introducing risk RAMs and such like is a part of the operation, and what we need to do is screw it down that people know what assets they've got. When I don't know any multi-site or complex organisation that can hand on heart say they know how many assets they've got. Yeah.
No,
so
we did a
size principle. Yeah.
we did a poll last week at the forum meeting, and the results of it in terms of the feedback. I think we had about 70 people responded, and it was really quite it was shocking but not surprising. Yeah. 72% of people said that they didn't believe that the O&Ms were correct or being updated. I think 92% said that they didn't believe that they would get the fire and emergency information and that it would be accurate, which is, really, I think I'm feeding this back to Tim Galloway, by the way. Tim Galloway's been in touch with me at the weekend. He's the director of building safety at the HSE. So I think we're getting some high level engagement or interest, let's say.
It is, because also the HSE are failing rapidly because they're rejecting everything.
Sure.
And so the problem there is they're losing credibility straight away. They're the second director within the operation of a new unit, which is supposed to be all singing, all dancing, helping, business grow in the UK. And at the moment, it's a restriction. It's causing project delay, and it's a nightmare.
Yep.
So, Tim needs to do something to reassure pounds, shillings, and pence that actually they're adding value.
Gentlemen, just
I'm just surprised they never saw it coming.
Keep an eye on time.
They've kind of lifted the bonnet and they've been surprised as to what they've seen underneath the bonnet, which is a surprise to me. Anybody in the industries find it as a surprise.
Yeah, they also haven't been able to prosecute anybody yet because they know they're at fault themselves. One could allegedly suggest. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But to me, focus on being able to identify the asset. If we get these nuggets coming along, we add them as a reference point and a potential to then build a second function.
Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for the contributions. Just keeping an eye on time. I think in terms of next steps and deliverables for this work stream, I would love to do another mapping. I think George, you suggested in the last meeting that we do another example for a part of the fire system, such as a fire damper. I think it would be really valuable to do that. Then we have the ice cream example, we have the fire damper example. Gordon, I don't know if we've got the model to a state where perhaps it's useful for you to populate an example as well, with the distributed heating systems. I don't know if this is fit for purpose now, but as we discussed in the meeting, I think having the model is one thing, but going through and filling it out, I think operationalizes it and potentially shows flaws or opportunities for improvement.
If I could make one suggestion, if you could pick it, if you start with MEP and then say an element of MEP is so we show the ability of active plans. So you identify MEP, which is part of structural. You go to MEP and then you go to the fire dampers within it. You can show all of the Building Safety Act requirements in one example, because you're listing them all and how they're interconnected. You just go straight to fire dampers. People think you're talking about fire. What we're saying is a fire element within the MEP, which is part of the structure. And this is the reason why the Building Safety Act came in, because structure, you can see the logic of flow.
It's certainly something that I mention in a lot of the presentations, going to try and tell people that the Building Safety Act is not going to stop at high-rise buildings and fire and protective sleeving. It's just the start of it. And for goodness sake, waking up and get to grips with where you're potentially not quite achieving your best in buildings. You're going to have to get there pretty soon, because the MOT certification of buildings, whether it be new or whether it be existing or whether it be to be validating PFI that's getting handed back to the UK government, they want MOT certificates and they're getting nothing. They are getting no evidence on some of these buildings, particularly in MEP provision, and they don't like it. And they're getting really nervous about it, and rightly so.
I think,
and the PFI owners are getting really nervous about it, and rightly so. But they're all scurrying around trying to do something.
So what about a smoke damper? What about a smoke damper, Howard?
be really careful what I say.
I'm trying to think of things that are
Well,
part
put
of an
this way.
MEP delivery.
The smoke damper gets a wee bit more specific and still sticks you in that fire protection process. So it kind of self-validates everybody to just say, right, okay, yeah, I know you're all banging on about fire protection. I know that we're kind of getting there, but you might, taking Howard's point, you might want to take them curveball and say, listen, it's bigger than this.
But there's if I take, I know, a hypothetical, right? So existing building being remodeled, refurbed, yeah, but it's going to have pot occupation. 5 floors, say, typical sort of, large office block. 1, 2, 3 is actually occupied. 1 is retail. 2nd, 3rd, up to 5th is actually sort of multiple clients. And then you're going to refurb 4 and 5. But during 4 and 5, you actually cut off the fire alarm system to the whole building. So you put an active watcher. And then secondly, you haven't considered the smoke vent, or you haven't considered the dampness, because you're going to change the occupation, therefore you're going to change the MEP to all. Yeah. You're going to go from open plan to individual offices or individual to office plan. Right. One of the key elements that is always forgotten would be the MEP, the dampers, and the smoke exhaust within the building. Yeah.
Yes.
Especially when you've got part occupied and refurbed. Yeah, and that is something that I allegedly could come across every day.
Yeah.
So I think just sorry, I need to be
Right.
sharp because I need to leave at 12. So if we work towards filling out if I distribute the model as we've got it right now, and we can come back and review an example of MEP or smoke dampers, Howard, would you be able to contribute to that by any chance?
Yeah, I say, unfortunately, I try and call in all these meetings, so I'll wherever my diary permits, I will. But if not, I'll be in the background with George anyway. So please, please direct anything to me. I'm trying to be as helpful. I'm just not always as available as I could wish.
Of course, not a problem.
And
so if we're looking
in that regard, there's only specific products that I can contribute to that we distribute, and it's not my wider sphere.
But if you could contribute, Gordon, your knowledge on the detail side,
absolutely.
Howard, are you going to UK Reef?
No, I always managed to dodge that.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is that UK Reef is brilliant. It's a networking, right? I'm too old in the tooth to actually carry on networking. I'd rather just talk to people I enjoy.
Okay.
My networking is making sure that the clients go.
Yeah.
But they speak to me anyway. Why do I need to put a suit and tie on?
Sure. Okay.
All I'm missing is the free drinks that we're hosting. and by all means, if anyone is going, Tetra Tech, we always have a good night, and please show some interest, and you'll get a free drink out of it.
Yeah,
I'm flying the flag.
I'm going, Howard. If there's anything I need to be sort of introduced to or something, so if you could put me on the radar.
The only thing I will say is AI at the moment in design, in D&E, and potentially coming into asset management is getting really interesting. Right? Yeah. There's little bits of software. And
cheers, Terence.
The AI is cheers, Terence. So, and I'm too long in the tooth really to be asked or want to actually get too involved in it. There's far younger and wiser colleagues that do it.
All I'm saying, Howard, if there's somebody in either Tetra Tech or indeed any of your customers who you could connect me to, that would be welcomed.
At the moment, George, that's being done behind the scenes.
Okay.
So, you'll see the email I sent to you on Friday.